Welcome, everyone. In the case of an emergency, we go out this door and out in either direction following the exit signs. There is also at the top of the elevator an area of refuge where you would just hang out in the case that you can't use the steps. Are there any agenda changes? Okay. Open to the public for items not related to the agenda. And just so everyone knows, we do have two of our planning commissioners joining us online tonight. We have Helen Reilly and Donna Lieben, which means we are all present for the meeting. So open to the public for items not related to the agenda. Okay, hearing none. Is anyone else joining us online? For those of you who are joining us online, we are not monitoring the chat. So to get my attention, you would turn your video on and wave. Is that right? Is that not a thing?
Webinar now, so you can raise your hand or send a note in the chat to just say, I'd like to speak.
Okay, yeah. We'll do that.
The easiest for those online would be to press the raise hand button and we'll see a little yellow hand.
Great, perfect. Okay, announcements. Does anyone have any announcements on the commission? Okay, any additional staff report?
Just a couple of quick notes. One, don't forget Town Meeting Day is coming up, March 3rd. Also, coming up on the schedule in later March 24th, you're going to be hosting a purpose and needs statement review and also what's called the local concerns meeting for the very early kickoff of a scoping study of the intersection of Mary Street, Williston Road, and the signal that goes into the hotel right there. There's going to be a public meeting in advance of that on the 4th of March, the day after Town Meeting Day, in the evening, which you're welcome to attend. But the results of that are going to be incorporated into a presentation and the purpose and need statement for you all at your meeting on the 24th. So just keep your eyes on it. It's exciting. It's the next thing coming up.
Ballots will be available tomorrow, I'm told, downstairs.
Your information is as good, if not better than mine, Michael.
And I won't be here for the 24th. I'm gone from the 18th of February until the 26th of March. So I'll miss a couple.
Okay. Well, I think we can move on to our first item on the agenda. It's number 5. It's an LDR update, public request. We do often hear these twice a year, but we didn't feel like we needed to wait. We didn't have a whole list of them. Sometimes we have a whole list. So this is on the agenda a little out of our normal schedule. There is a memo in the packet specific to the request. And Kelsey, was there something that you wanted to say before we go in? I think we have some people here for the request that might want to say some things also.
Yeah, so everything that I had to say, I'd sort of written out in the packet. I didn't know, Paul, if you had any additional couple of...
Just a reminder for commissioners that we haven't had one of these in a little bit. So just a reminder that tonight the objective is to hear just an initial, what's the ask that is coming from the community. That is the Planning Commission's policy. You are not under any obligation to take action tonight. When you do choose to take action, it's really just, I like to think of it as mail sorting of, is this a topic that you are interested in taking up or might be interested in taking up, in which case, as you see in our recommendation, we would recommend that it be on the candidate list for next year's work plan because we think it's a fairly substantive project. If it was a very small project, you could say, if it's co-aligned with the current project that you're working on, or you could choose to give guidance that it's not something that you're interested in pursuing. So to the extent that you'd want to have enough of like a handle on what the request is, but we're not really diving into substance tonight. Does
Okay.
that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay.
And that's
So-
mostly for us, so we don't need to like wordsmith or whatever. We would just want to understand the concept and how it might fit in or not. Okay, did you have something you wanted to start out with? Yeah, come on up.
And there's only one chair there just because I was setting up the room quickly. It is not you're welcome to all come and sit at the table if you like.
Yeah,
You'll shout from there? Okay.
But speaking of, I might actually move. Maybe currently is this thing here, so just so that everybody can hear.
How long is the cord? How long ago? Good evening, I'm Dave Marshall from Civil Engineering Associates. And we were asked to come see you tonight to talk a little bit about wetlands and the opportunity to perhaps create some modifications to the existing land development regulations to create some improved opportunities to protect the better wetlands and perhaps to enable the Development Review Board some flexibility to recognize that certain wetlands don't have as large a value. Currently, the regulations create buffers for wetlands depending on the zoning district that they're in, but they don't take into account the quality of the wetland. So what we wanted to do is see if the Planning Commission was interested in opening a discussion that would enable a better understanding of the opportunities in regards to how wetlands can be regulated. And with that, we did introduce some ideas in the package that was distributed to the members. But at that standpoint, that's not the end all. All we're trying to do is create opportunities for discussion and create new ideas to see if, again, there are better ways to create land use policy in the city to better, ultimately create better products as far as what we're all trying to achieve. So that's really the big ask before the Planning Commission. And out of all that, we're very interested to hear your thoughts and to answer questions and kind of see whether or not this would be something that the commission would be interested in taking up.
anyone, and did you have anything else also? No, you.
Yes, you mentioned that this particular wetland may not have great value. Is that based on some review by the ANR or the wetland specialist?
Well, I think we don't want to define it as one wetland. I think we have wetlands throughout the city that have very important values and functions, and some that are very low quality in regards to their functions and values. But right now, the regulations don't allow us to recognize the difference. We want to basically make sure that the high value wetlands have an appropriate, maybe even higher level of protection than what is afforded today. But on the other side of the coin, there are some very poor quality wetlands that if you asked a layperson to go out into a field and say, show me where the wetlands are, they would walk right over the wetlands that are currently defined that way today. So ultimately, the question is when it comes to land planning, do we want to be focusing on just generic buffers to a wetland, whether it's a good wetland or a bad wetland? Bad wetland, there are no bad wetlands. A poor, lower quality wetland. And with that, try to create opportunities for, again, better land planning. We have situations where projects are prevented from using certain areas, even though it's a low quality wetland and a smaller buffer would still be appropriate to protect the functions and values of that wetland. On the other hand, in certain zoning districts in the city, there are really some very high quality wetlands, and the smaller buffer might not be appropriate. Or there are some things that we work with the state on where we average the buffers, where there are certain areas you're allowed to nick into it a little bit, but you create larger volumes in other areas to create this no net loss of buffer. So all we're trying to do is figure out if putting some more tools in the toolbox would be a good idea or not. And if everybody says, no, it's not a good idea, Dave, go away, then we'll go away. But what we really wanted to do is try to bring some additional planning tools to the planning commission to see if they do indeed make sense to be added to the land development regulations at an appropriate time. But without this discussion, nothing will change. So what we want to, we're not trying to force anything. Certainly, we're not trying to reduce the goals of resource protection. But at the same time, we also have other public policies where we're trying to promote good land use. And out of all that, that's essentially the discussion point that we'd like to bring forward to the planning commission and staff, and with that, see where it might go.
Well, you should know that over time, wetlands change. We have had some class 3 wetlands, which one could say are poor. And over time, they've been left alone and they've become class 2 wetlands. So it's something that you should bear in mind, that a wetland that is maybe not that great, but if left undisturbed over time, it will generate or regenerate or expand.
Yes, and we see that in areas that have been manipulated by man over time, whether we, primary example are farm fields, where the vegetation has been beat back over time, primarily for the goals of creating additional crop areas. But when that particular activity stops, the regeneration occurs again. And that's why also wetland delineations have to be updated every 5 years to reflect that particular type of movement. So all we're trying to do is recognize, to your point though, yes, there's always going to be a point in time in which a delineation is done and certain decisions are made upon. And that's again goes back to perhaps certain areas that do have that opportunity and identifying them as being certain areas that perhaps buffer modification is not appropriate. So what we're trying to do is enable more information to be presented to the Development Review Board as far as the quality of the wetlands. That's ultimately every time there's a wetland delineation, that information is shared with the state of Vermont. But right now, there's not a tool to share that in a meaningful way that creates anything different than a standard 50-foot or 100-foot buffer from the wetland. So in these particular cases, we're trying to not overwhelm staff or the DRB with information, but actually outfit them with more education on what the resources in the area are, as opposed to a black and white, nope, we're done, let's move on to something else. So yes, static numbers are very useful for just saying, don't go there. The reality is that sometimes when a 100-foot buffer is in play, and that's in many of the lower density portions of the city, residential density, it forces you to go perhaps into areas that you might not want to go in, whether it be steeper slopes or right on those particular edges of developable areas. So all we're trying to do is again recognize or enable the recognition of the quality of the resource. And again, as I mentioned, it's a double-edged sword or a two-sided coin, where there are opportunities perhaps to increase the buffer for really, really high quality wetlands. So you get into the industrial open space district, the buffer is only 50 feet, despite the quality that the wetland might be even larger and might even need more buffer. So what we want to do is we would like to create a tool that would allow for a better recognition of those particular resources as far as their quality, so that we can then apply an appropriate land management tool to those areas.
Yeah, thank you for your explanation. Yeah, I mean, my initial thought from reading the packet and hearing you is I'd potentially be interested in looking further into this. Not to say I fall one way or the other versus whether or not the existing amendments, whether we should make an amendment, but it does feel like this is a pretty significant issue, given that both wetland protection is also very important, but also the buffers, render large areas of land undevelopable. And that may be a good thing in some circumstances, but I guess this does feel like an area where minor tweaks to this amendment could have pretty significant impacts. And my initial thought is maybe, look into this a bit. That's my thought initially.
I have two questions. One, does anyone have a pen or a pencil? Running out of ink.
We can make that happen.
We can find a pen. And, thank you, Kelsey. Sure. And do you have examples of where somebody has done something like this, like a town? Maybe I'm just not aware, but I don't know that the state does that they.
They care about the class.
They do care about the class, but you're talking about the functions and values,
Functions
I
and
believe, which is
values.
actually different than the class, so.
It is, but functions and values are also taken into account when the state either says, yes, you can encroach in the buffer, or you can't, or actually encroach into the wetlands. So they are again taking into account the quality of the wetland, its functions and values, when assessing whether or not a certain activity can occur in the jurisdictional area of the wetlands. So the state takes those things into account. The Corps of Engineers, the federal government takes that into account. They don't have buffers. They don't have buffers, but they also take that into account when they are either allowing you to impact a wetland or not. So there are groups out there that take that into account. Some municipalities allow for waiver or reductions of setbacks. They're limited. Shelburne just adopted one where they allow the Development Review Board to reduce setbacks, but not more than 50% of what's allowed or what's required. I'm sorry, wrong choice of words. So not saying that that's what we want to adopt, but what we do want to look at is all the different tools that are out there. I'm not in a position to bring to you every single one of them tonight, but what we'd like to do is at least start to investigate or at least report those particular types of methodologies that are used by other municipalities to provide that particular planning opportunity when it comes to, again, protecting resources and enabling appropriate levels of development, for lack of a better word, on the property to ultimately achieve whatever other policy goals we have in the city. So we have one, which is to improve upon the amount of residential development. As much as we hate to say it, that is a policy. It's embedded in the municipal plan. It's embedded in the zoning regulations, primarily through your zoning districts and the densities that are allowed in them. Again, trying to focus them in more urbanized areas. But when you have perhaps a low quality wetland that has a buffer, the question is, when you're trying to slide something by it, can there be an impact? And right now the rules are very strict as far as not being able to allow you to do those things. So we're trying to figure out where the sweet spot is. And the only way to figure that out is to provide you thoughts, ideas, and perhaps some language that you can look at and say, we've looked at it, but we're just not interested in going forward. But all we're trying to do is at least open the discussion and see if you're interested in proceeding with some of that particular type of dialogue.
John?
Looking at the background memo, it indicated that the current regs were put in place late 2001. 21.
Yeah.
Do we have the history here to get an idea of, how much discussion was there around that and how we landed there? 4 years doesn't seem like a long time to have visited. So if we spent a lot of time and effort 4 years ago to do this, I think I'd be less inclined to say, let's look at it again. But if it was not something that was thought in great depth, then maybe it is right.
We spent a lot of time
That was part of our Article 12
and
project, and then it was, yeah. I
we
agree.
had to make a case for 100-foot buffers in some areas and 50 in others. So,
It was a big project and it was also kind of in the context of some of the other resources as well and kind of concurrently looking at the new PUD standards. So there were like a couple different things going on at the same time. So there was a lot of work. There were many people who wanted more than 100 feet too. I mean, so where we landed was a compromise kind of across many different perspectives. But that said, I mean, we don't always get things perfect the first time. So, although I did spend a lot of time talking about it for many years, I'm not opposed to
we can,
continuing to talk about it just because I'm sick of it or something. Like, I think it's valid to have more discussion.
Yeah. A&R and DEC, they have the tools that you would like us or the DRB to have.
I think so, yes. I mean, right now, every time you prepare a wetland permit application with the state of Vermont, it has an exhaustive question and answer section as far as the functions and values of the wetland at issue.
Hmm.
So what it's trying to do is at least take from the field and put it into a context that allows for a third party.
I think that's quite an additional burden that you want to put on the DRB.
So DRB deals with a lot of issues, as far as balancing X, Y, and Z. And I think in this particular case, when an applicant is asked or asks, if this were to come fruition, for some type of waiver in a wetland, it's unfair to staff because they're not trained wetland ecologists. But this would be a scenario where there is a tool in the toolbox in the LDRs that allows for third parties to be paid for by the applicant to review the ask and to provide recommendations to the city. So there are opportunities for an ask by an applicant to have to be very serious and to be fully supported by the information, because it is not going to be reviewed by, and I'm not a wetland ecologist. I know enough to be dangerous, but I'm not a wetland ecologist, to be reviewed by a professional and provide advice to the Development Review Board and to staff in regards to whether or not the information in the application and the request is properly founded. So that's a tool, in order to keep the burden of, and it's more than technical, it's basically an environmental resource question and facts in a way that allows ultimately an educated decision by the Development Review Board to be made available to them. It's really no different than a traffic study or a third-party consultant that reviews the traffic study and says, there's a lot of numbers in those things. And if you've ever seen the thickness, it's mind-boggling. But nonetheless, this particular process is what the Development Review Board does. And these are also the tools that are available to the city to enable third parties to assist in that particular decision-making process at no cost to the city. When the applicant comes with these complicated questions, the city has the right to basically get appropriate level of technical assistance. And that's, again, another opportunity or another tool that's already there to enable the Development Review Board to take on any number of different technical issues that come forward with applications.
We,
Well-
Donna, Donna, did you still have your hand up?
Yes,
Go ahead.
yes. Well, anybody who's ever worked in architecture and engineering has come across situations where something is found to be a wetland that nobody realized was a wetland because it wasn't there traditionally, but it sometimes got created as a matter of moving some soil around on a site. And I was just kind of curious because common roots is part of this question. I mean, or I guess it's part of the consideration, something about common roots. And I acknowledge that this happens in agricultural situations a lot, where um, perhaps a piece of a wetland was never acknowledged, but somehow it's occurred there over time and stuff like that, because of soil movement, water movement, and things like that. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is there are a lot of situations where better consideration of what is a lower use wetland, or one that was created because of the way the land's been used over time, or because it's been neglected. I mean, the example that I had was a building that I worked at in New Jersey. It was part of a development that wasn't fully built out right at first. And so some soil had been moved around, and a little temporary pond had been created to allow, water to drain off into those areas. So that became a wetland, and it was delightful. And as soon as the owner of the property realized that was going to be called a wetland, they bulldozed it. They destroyed it just because there was somebody who's going to come in and say they couldn't build out that property the way they wanted to because of that hole in the ground that became known as a wetland. And of course, we were crushed because we used to like to watch the birds and all the little animals that really enjoyed that little temporary wetland. Um, and so sometimes I think the rules can work against you in situations where um, maybe longer term plans are changing and things like that. So I guess what I'm saying is I would very much be in favor of having some guidelines about when a very minor wetland could be not as big a detriment or an obstacle. I don't really know, but I know at Hubbard Park that had to be redesigned a couple of times because they kept finding wetlands in places where nobody realized it was really a wetlands. And I mean, there may be some value in it, but sometimes I don't think that value is that obvious.
No, I was gonna say, I would be in favor of, revisiting this. I think especially given the uncertainty with the governor's executive order, with what we don't know what's gonna happen there, not that it affects us directly, but there is gonna be some influence there. But I would be in favor of revisiting this. I think it would warrant.
I think Paul's suggestion is.
Yeah.
very well.
I think it's not a light
Paul
issue.
and Colin.
No, it's a meaty issue. It's not a light issue. I mean, given the amount of time we spent on it in Article 12, yes.
Helen, you have your hand up? Go ahead.
Yes, I guess I have a question as well as just a comment. So my question is, and I'm sorry, I forget your name.
Dave Marshall.
Dave Marshall, you suggested that there may even be a time where, if it's an important enough wetland, 100 feet is not enough as a buffer. So I'm wondering if in the end product, if you will, these tools, are you suggesting that the design review board would have maybe some parameters, like sometimes it's 50, sometimes it's 100, but you can make it greater or smaller depending on what the data says?
I'm saying that there's a lot of different directions we can go. And I did say that, you know,
Yeah.
the high quality wetlands are the ones that we should be working the hardest to
Mhm.
protect. And then from there, what we need to do is figure out how to create, you know, an understanding of what is the high value, what's medium value, what's lower value. And with that, then apply an appropriate buffer. So yes, it's variable. Everybody loves a static number because everybody can plan by it. But at the
Yeah.
same time, we're trying to figure out how to provide an important resource, the appropriate level of protection. So right now, that really valuable wetland in the industrial open space district doesn't get the same buffer as it would be if it was in one of the lower density portions of the city. So we haven't applied the wetland protection, we've applied the land protection. So what we want to do is see if we can refocus on the resource protection to provide appropriate land planning tools appropriately.
Well, I don't know a whole lot about wetlands, and I guess that this is probably a really naive question, but and I do appreciate that wetlands are sometimes created, as Donna said, by moving earth around as you put a road in or a development or something, but don't they still serve a purpose? I mean, is an important wetland has more importance maybe to Lake Champlain or a stream or something, but a wetland, well, I guess that's the question. I don't know. Are there some wetlands that we don't need? They're like useless? And we might as well move the earth around so we can develop it? We made a mistake in our last go through with development? I don't know.
No, that's not what we're talking about. What we're trying to do is provide appropriate levels of protection for all the wetlands in the city. We're not trying to erase wetlands, we're trying to modify the buffers that protect the wetlands. And depending on the quality of the wetland, the buffer should be perhaps bigger in certain circumstances or perhaps smaller in certain circumstances. This is the same practice that the Development Review Board put into place before the current LDRs were in place. So they had that flexibility and they would review the conditions of the wetland and either make a determination that no, the buffer can't change, or yes, it's a really poor quality wetland, we'll go from 50 feet down to 25 feet. But at the same time, we're also going to ask you to put up some sort of demarcation to protect that particular area. So these were all practices that Development Review Board had already been doing. They've just had those particular tools or opportunities to address or reflect on the actual conditions of wetlands removed. So what we're trying to do is open up a discussion to see if we can put back into place appropriate levels of flexibility so that the land planning goals of the city can be fully achieved.
I just to clarify that, do you, is your ask only about the buffers, or are you talking about the encroachment into the wetlands themselves? 'Cause I
At
think
this
that
point,
would have been
it's primarily focused on the buffers.
buffers specifically, okay. Michael?
I was gonna say, we've made a recommendation that we will look at this issue.
Have we?
I don't know.
Yes. Have we voted? Yeah.
We have not.
These four.
So I think what I would say, I'm hearing a lot of interest in taking it up. Not tonight, but like, but I guess before we kind of finish this discussion and do any kind of voting or anything, is there anyone from the audience who wanted to say anything else? It seems like we're kind of honing in on like a take it up later, not tonight, but in future time.
Just a quick comment that, Governor Scott wrote some executive orders where he mandated a change to the buffers themselves. And it's up in the air. We don't know whether those have any legal weight or not. But,
Right.
I mean, we're a Dillon state, right? I've said this before, the legislature could go and change them on us anyway, so that's hard to say.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's one of the things that is in the staff recommendation to kind of watch what's going on at the state level, so we're not kind of working at odds to something that might come out at the state level as well. So.
And just to be clear on that subject, I know it was in one of the memos that we referenced to you, but the governor's executive order currently applies to the state's review of wetlands, but it does not directly affect our local regulations. Our authority is granted in statute to regulate wetlands. So while the subject area is certainly one that is in topic, and certainly to Tim's point, the legislature could change laws. We have not seen anything coming up yet in the session, but who knows? Right now, the governor's executive order does not on the subject of wetlands supersede our local regulation. So I don't know that we need a vote, because it's just our recommendation, if that's what you wanted to follow, was that this would be a candidate project for your FY27 work plan. What that would mean to us with head nods or however you want to do it would be that we would probably work this up a little bit just to get the scale of what something like this would look like, so that you coming into your probably April meeting
Probably April 14th, yeah.
Yeah, would have this is what this could look like, just as we would do with all the other projects, and then you can balance out at that time.
Yeah, and just having a little more understanding of, is this do we need an outside consultant to talk to us about wetland science? And mapping? Is it a 10-hour staff project and a 1 meeting thing? Is it a 6 meeting thing and 100 hours of staff time? Just sort of those orders of magnitude on time and money. We'd figure that out so you have that in your consideration when you're figuring out what you're going to be doing in fiscal year 27.
So we heard, is there general agreement on that approach? Nodding. Okay, great. Perfect.
That's all we needed tonight from that.
Anything else? So, I mean, we're very slow. I just like to mention that. I'm sure you know from your work. But we're adding it to the work plan list. Yeah. Great.
Very good.
Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah. Okay, back to my agenda. Here we go. Number 6 on the agenda is the regional future land use map and plan. You're welcome to stay or go. Either one. So we have received, or I guess the RPC has received comments back.
Yeah, so this is really just kind of an update. Most of what we had to say is in your memo about this new process to everybody. Regional plan prepares their draft map, their draft plan. They submit it in draft form to the newly formed State Land Use Review Board. They get comments back, which they got in December. Kelsey and I tag team participating in their review meeting, so we saw all of the conversations that the Land Use Review Board is having amongst themselves. And then they provided this draft guidance back. In general, as I said in the memo, the Land Use Review Board had very positive feedback about the regional plan, particularly all the public outreach that has been done and really trying to reach groups that aren't often reached. And some of this information, when you have time to take a deep breath, which is never, but we'll find this time anyway. There's some really good outreach that was done to some New American communities and hearing what their needs are that we haven't really tapped into, and they were from sort of all around central Chittenden County. There are a few specific feedback, especially in the map around the county, and they sort of fall in 2 buckets. Please provide additional information, and a change needs to happen. The most significant one to us is that if you recall from the future land use map, there were the city center downtown, and then 3 future villages, 2 along Shelburne Road and 1 at the corner of Kimball and Kennedy. The board concluded that the one at the corner of Kimball and Kennedy, while they appreciate all of the hard work that is being done to create a focal point there, they could not read it in the statute that it qualifies as a village center because it does not presently yet have any of the components. Michael, you asked about whether residential counts as a civic use. What they are specifically looking for is for a civic use is parks and or libraries and or town halls. So they acknowledge that, you know, that's not necessarily what they would love it to be, but the reading of what the statute is doesn't give them the ability to say a future center.
Yeah, I think I'm anticipating what Colin's about to say.
I guess I'm now confused why they didn't outright reject this Shelburne Fayette Drive, for example.
Oh, there's a cemetery there. Is that why?
So Shelburne and Fayette,
First,
they're wrestling with tough choices, right? They acknowledge that these are both areas where road is available. They said you gotta make a stronger case. I would say along Shelburne Road, the cemetery is there, the Orchard School is just across the street from there. There are historic resources nearby. One could argue that Szymanski Park is a walking distance away. It's not a classic fit, but I guess I would say that they are trying to read it as liberally as they can, and they couldn't get there for Kimball Avenue.
and they did like that there are a handful of historic structures in that area, and then the drawing the area just a bit bigger. Captures some of that sort of, a couple of historic structures, a couple of like the school and the cemetery.
School as well, the IDX Drive.
Right.
Oh, yeah, the
Commons.
Or yeah, right, so I guess it's closer to the
No,
fair.
Vermont Commons.
whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, I didn't know, I wasn't sure if that counts as a,
Yeah,
anyway, but yeah, so that's farther south though.
a little bit.
That's a little, the fire department, that Vermont Commons are a little bit farther south and out of that area, but, there's definitely a tension in the statute between calling it future land use, like mapping and planning, and then saying, no, you have to have the thing to be called the thing, and so that's just how the statute's currently written. It's a general comment that we've had, and we've had discussions with the RPC about, and RPC has talked to people on the LURB about, but it would have to be a statutory change.
And on that front, just as a FYI, I guess I should put this under announcement, but I was invited to speak to Senate Natural Resources a couple of weeks ago on what we've done to implement Act 181. And it was mostly a catch up on, you know, what's been sort of orienting them at the beginning of the session, but I did take the opportunity to say that the statutes really they're missing this component of a future center as one of the key things, a thing that we are working really hard on, because even to your point, Colin.
We'll get there.
I think everybody can agree, absolutely a great place for infill, but the statutes don't. The statutes conceive of the classic Vermont, you know, the downtown village surrounded by open countryside. And, you know, Act 181 does a lot of great things, and it was a big compromise, and there's hard things in a big statute. So we've taken the opportunity to say, you know, we know that you want these areas to be successful. Here's what would be helpful. So we're planting the seed for the future, but
That would apply to Kimball and Kennedy, because you've got these two big buildings, a lot of people there. You don't have yet civic spaces.
Right.
But I'm assuming there are going to be.
So there are park spaces planned in there that are under construction, and maybe even under the current statute, 5 years from now, we would qualify, but.
And will we then
It'll get re-upped from time to time. I guess fundamentally, though, it's too bad, it doesn't actually change anything. Being a village versus being a planned growth area brings the same benefits, generally speaking. So it would send a signal, and it's something that we can work towards. And I can envision a future where new villages get more and more benefits. But as it stands right now, most of the benefits are historic tax credits anyway. So it doesn't really fundamentally change any of what we're doing.
But O'Brien also has plans over the hill for commercial and services that would serve a residential area.
Absolutely, yeah. And we showed those, the RPC showed them, and I think that like I said, the Land Use Review Board felt very positive about the work that's being done. They just couldn't read it as being the definition of the statute.
And so if I'm reading it correctly, that the thought is to sort of focus our efforts just on sort of the Fayette Shelburne versus the federal Shelburne, essentially.
So what we have talked from the staff perspective, would love to hear from you. I'm gonna move on from the Kennedy and Kimball one to talk about the two along Shelburne
Mhm.
Road. The land use review board had some, we need you to make a stronger case for the centers as well as the corridor. They had some questions about both of the centers, the one at Fayette and also the one on at Farrell Street. What we have preliminarily said to the Regional Planning Commission as they try to wrestle with this and 18 other towns worth of this is that our number one priority for that area is the Fayette Road one, where you all have said we want to be doing a village project where we're applied for funding for. So if in the end, after their discussions and some conversations with board members, it lands on, we can only have one, that's the one that we would like to make sure that that's where we're putting our eggs in.
And
Obviously, both would be great,
Mhm.
but if we're being asked to prioritize for some reason,
yeah,
That makes sense.
and importantly, the RPC is having, and Blurb is having the same conversations with other municipalities. And Burlington on, the other side of Shelburne Road had a similar view, like we would love to have that as a center, but it's a lower priority for us than some of the other, like their South End projects and things like that. So when both sides of the street were kind of like, we would love to have it, but it's a lower priority. It sort of made that whole area just fall down a rut.
Jessica, quick question. The paragraph you talks about planned growth areas, enterprise transition, it talks about Sheldon Road south of IDX, Wilson Road corridor east of Kennedy Drive. Does that mean that they didn't see justification for those being included in growth areas? I'm just trying to figure out.
yeah, good question. Do you want to take that one? So there's 11 future land use categories. We've been talking about the villages right now. There's another sort of grouping of them in areas that are known to be intentional areas of future growth as compared with areas that are rural. And those are sort of a grouping of planned growth areas, enterprise areas, and transition areas. And transition area typically means it's missing some significant component to be a complete neighborhood and complete accessibility. So in South Burlington Country Club Estates put that because while it's a great place to live, it is very hard to get anywhere else from there, especially bike on foot. There's no parks there, stores there, that kind of thing. The board is wrestling a little bit with areas that are principally business park areas. And should those be classified as a planned growth area, which the statutes talk as being areas with a fair amount of housing component to them? Or should they be considered enterprise areas, which are considered to be business parks that are somewhat disconnected from villages? So it's sort of which one is the right fit? I think that we've gotten some signals that at least a portion of what we consider our business park area may be switched over to enterprise, specifically south of the interstate, on Meadowland, where there really isn't good bike ped connectivity back over the bridge yet. Possibly, an area like Tech Park or the east end of Williston Road. Fundamentally, the implications of that would be that a planned growth area is eligible for the Act 250 Tier 1A, but the enterprise areas are not. So the other thing that I talked with Senate Natural Resources about was this sort of tying the benefits of Act 250 to some of the areas that are development areas, but not others, creates this sort of unintentional pressure to assign land use categories in areas. And that if municipalities were given the ability to make the case in areas that were intended for development, regardless of the category, that it might lead to a better outcome. Leave, of course, the rural areas into not being eligible, because the whole point of that is to be a rural. But we'll see where that goes.
Right, so somewhere like South Burlington, where we've generally, as the policy, been looking towards tier 1A for as much of our development area as we can. It leads us to sort of artificially be saying, oh, well, Tech Park should be planned growth area, when we've actually made some pretty significant decisions in the last couple of years that it's not where we want housing. But because it's those two things are connected, then you end up sort of making a slightly, wobbly argument about, oh, it should be planned growth area because we want it to be in the tier 1A. Instead of it being what it really is, which is the enterprise area, more or less. So there's
Even that one talks about being disconnected definitionally, so it's not even a perfect fit there, which is tricky. So.
I'm just surprised, I'm sorry, I'm just surprised that they didn't stop, Sheldon Road stopped at IDX.
Shelburne Road is,
That
yeah,
seemed to be-
that's a weirder one to me than Tech
Yeah.
Park. I think Tech Park and the east end of Williston Road is pretty commercial. There's a couple of neighborhoods like Shunpike and other places, but south of IDX Drive, there's apartment buildings, and Allen Road has.
I'm not terribly concerned about that area. I mean, I know it's in their letter, but I think we can make a pretty solid case in that area of why it should and will qualify. But I think it's unearthing these sort of contradictions to the statute.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to add sort of a little historical background that I think is kind of important to these conversations. And that is, 60 years ago or 70 when they were putting in the interstate. South Burlington became a city that agreed to have major transportation roads bisect our community. Route 7 cuts us in half. 89 cuts us probably in another third, and then with the link 189. And as a consequence, I think all those roads and their improvements have been a real economic boon and importance to Chittenden County and the state. Yet its impact on this community, we finally have a city center. And, that came about in the 2020s. So I think it's important that they, in the conversations, both the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission and the state, I don't know, at least acknowledge that and help us find a way to really develop those town centers in a community that was willing to give up a lot, I think, for the betterment of the state. So it's just that goes way back, and probably no one on the Planning Commission or the Chittenden County Regional Commission was even around when that was going on. But that was an important part of the development and the impact on our city. So.
I have a question tonight.
Yeah.
Are you as staff kind of working on the response to these, or like what?
Right, so the job is the regional planning commissions to respond. We've been, they've been checking in with us. I think we feel pretty good that we have continued to advocate very clearly for the policies that you have developed. And that have been adopted by council. We feel like, that we're in pretty good standing on all of that. Really just, we know that this is a really big project and we want you to feel connected to it and want you to be in the loop of what's happening, the kind of feedback we've been giving, any questions that you might have about that. So it's really, this is what we were expecting out of this today. And no specific action unless there's anything that you were saying you needed, had additional concerns about, but we feel pretty good about where we're going with it.
Do we have items from the public?
Ryan,
Here in the
Dora
room.
raised his hand up.
We have Ryan. Ryan, you want to go ahead? I think we need to unmute you.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
A question and a comment. In the material from the agenda, it sounded like you might send out more information on this to the rest of the commission. Was there a map that was included at some point?
There is not a updated map yet, Ryan. So basically, I think what I wrote in the memo, and if I didn't write that clearly, is as more information unfolds, we'll let folks know. The Regional Planning Commission was potentially gonna have a draft out this week, but that got moved by a week, so I don't have new materials.
Gotcha.
It is as live as it gets right now.
Okay. And just going back to those village areas, right? Like around Farrell Street, I mean, it's unfortunate, but I see how there is also no civic infrastructure, parks or things like that. But at the end of Kennedy Drive, where it meets Williston Road, there's a cemetery in that area, and I realized the village drawn area was south of Potash Brook, but the development node does extend north over towards that cemetery. And I don't know if that's something people want to think about for the future in terms of how and when to argue for that, but I figured I'd throw it out there.
Thanks, Ryan. And I know that our Sexton's committee has been doing some really great work of reinvigorating efforts into maintaining our cemeteries, including that one. And so more to come on that. That's a great point.
Great. Any other comments or questions or? Don, go ahead.
Yeah, just a real quick one. Of all the nodes to select, I'm glad that they recognized the one at Farrell. Not Fayette, sorry. That they recognized that one, because it's just like we've had conversations before about the need to provide better cross communication across the four lane roadway there. And I think that CCRPC is also recognizing that, this is an important location. And, as things start developing, I think that we need to start thinking more about that node as being an important one to cross, for pedestrian traffic crossing above the roadway, and, potential development at higher scale that connects across the roadway somehow, or under it somehow. So I'm glad they recognize that.
Anything else on this item? Okay, we can move on to item 7, which is the lighting standards update, specifically the project charge, which is a new thing we're doing, where we do a project charge as we get into something.
We've done it. It's been a year, maybe?
Yeah.
It's been a good year of project charge.
Yeah, we're getting used to them. And this is an interesting one in that it's where there's 2 project charges. We can sort of think of these things as parallel. At the moment, where the lighting one is probably going to be a bit more in depth than the second one, or at least a larger project in scope. But we decided to introduce them simultaneously because we're talking about a very similar area of the regulations, the performance standards, and there is some interplay between these various standards and regulations. So we decided to introduce them together, but as separate projects because there is enough distinction. So I'll just start with the lighting and then move on to the general ones. Lighting is regulated by the performance standards section, which is a special section of regulations that are sort of general regulations that apply to things typically that might cross a property line and are ongoing involve like an ongoing use of a property, whereas most of our zoning regulations apply at the moment of new construction or reconfiguring or change of use or something like that. So performance standards would apply to things like vibration, and glare, reflection, smoke emission, that sort of stuff, that's associated with like the ongoing use of a property. So they're a little bit unique in our regulations in that aspect, in that sense, and specifically light and projected light or reflected light is one of those regulations. So that is a big component of the current performance standards that it's referred to as glare. Another area in the in the LDRs where light is regulated is in our site plan and development review processes, like for subdivision or site plan review, lighting plans, like the physical layout of light emitting fixtures is a requirement for for plans that involve adding or removing those around. And then there's also part of that is a list of suggested and acceptable light fixture types. And then there, much like the heights regulations that we considered last year, there are a bunch of other sort of miscellaneous scattered references to light emission throughout the LDRs, but site plan review, and development review and performance standards form the bulk of the regulations that we have on light emissions. So the point of this project is to examine those, knowing that there are new technologies in terms of like light fixtures and light emission that we may need to be taking into account when we are performing a review under site plan review or subdivision review.
Also, one of the goals in the city plan is to reduce light pollution.
That's right.
So,
Yeah.
Plays into this perfectly.
Yeah. And I believe I can't remember off the top of my head which of the goals and actions is in there, but it should be one of them. So, in addition to modernizing and streamlining and making things more efficient, also reducing light pollution is one of the stated goals.
I absolutely agree with all these goals. I guess my own comment on the goal is, I guess, just to make sure we also, I make sure that like another one of those goals is ensuring that our communities are like walkable at night, because like light is, and I'm sure you guys are all aware, but I think just want to make explicit that like that's our goal, and the two do not necessarily have to like oppose necessarily. Like a well-designed even lighting plan is better for everyone. There's less light pollution, and having super light, super dark spots is bad for pedestrians and people walking around. But I think we just want to, I want to make sure we're explicit. Like the goal is not, oh, we need to reduce light at all costs. It's more, that is one of the goals, and also making sure that our patients feel, safety, but that does not mean put stadium lights everywhere, because that is bad. And one other comment I will just make that is tangentially related to that point is, at least in terms of stuff like, just to be aware of, is that VTrans is currently in the process of updating their lighting standards, in particular with emphasis on, we have about these 10-year-old set of standards you can find somewhere on the VTrans website for lighting design, and they're all right, but they're definitely, we noticed that they're a little deficient, particularly in they could use improvements in pedestrian facilities, and like crosswalks and sidewalks. And so we're currently in the process of VTrans of, I think the RFP is going up pretty soon, of modernizing, basically paying consultants to develop us a modern for pedestrian facilities, like sidewalks and crosswalks. So I guess it's trying to say is that more thing with this project scope, I think there's a good chance that in a year or two when that thing is out, that there may be ability to kind of, for those specific areas of like crosswalks and sidewalks, to kind of adopt like the state guidance to say, hey, and they'll be doing a lot of work. I mean, I will say as well, Maine DOT has a really good guide that they designed pretty recently. They just hired a really good consultant. They have a really good guide on lighting stuff for pedestrian facilities, and we're hoping to get something like that essentially in Vermont. And so maybe don't spend too much time in those areas, because there may be someone else doing that as well.
To that point, Colin, thanks for bringing that up. Just to be clear,
The proposed scope here is related to the, our review authority on non-streets and roads. So it'd be the land development regulations are, applied to our, to private development or the city as a developer. Our DPW specs are the equivalent of what you're talking about, and that would be a great project to update what we do in our public streets, or if somebody is building, doing a project on a public street.
So
This is for lighting on private land.
but so with the DPW, though, would those standards apply to say shared use path on a private parcel?
Yes.
Okay,
As long as it is a private one, not indicated to become a future shared use path.
The DPW.
Oh,
specs.
DPW specs, yes, sorry, yes. They would apply to anything that is or is becoming public.
Yes.
okay,
So what they would not apply to is something like if you have there's an internal path amongst a few
Yeah.
buildings that are all
Gotcha,
in a
gotcha.
private lot, to get from the door of the building to a part of the parking lot or to the barbecue
Yeah.
area or whatever it is, those sorts of internal paths. I think there's definitely room for that kind of, safety for people using those paths at night to be in this, but also to be potentially referred to or related somehow to the public right of way standards as well.
oh, thanks for clarification.
Donna, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it might have been about a year ago or something. I had introduced briefly to the Planning Commission the International Dark Sky Association's recommended ordinances. And it's ordinance language and everything, and it's basically they've been trying to get basically it's an international standard, or they're trying to get it adopted by as many localities as can to try to standardize on lighting practice. And it's very much a reduction of light levels, because Vermont's probably one of the few places that seems to even attempt to control light levels. But it's and the whole process of defining the metrics and how to do lighting design. The great thing that they've identified is that you have to provide the standards in the language that lighting design utilizes. And so much of the planning, they've attempted to make it very understandable to the average person, but it makes no sense at all to a lighting designer. And those are the people that basically have to determine how something is designed. But if you're using language that doesn't meet the metrics that they're used to using, it's not going to work. The other thing that the Dark Sky Association has done was standardized on lighting zones, which means that the same level of light is not appropriate for every type of zone. A light zone 0 is basically it's a natural resource area, a waterfront area that's natural, not a downtown area. A light zone 5 probably exists only in the center of major cities, very, very high light levels. We don't have anything like that in Vermont. I don't think anything in Vermont basically goes above a level 3. And so it's an important thing, because that can align with the um, basically your development, your zoning regulations can say, if this is the kind of zone you're in, this is the light level, the light guide level that you can adopt, and it's pretty easy. So what I'm trying to say is they've tried to make the thing very easily standardized, and that's what I'm recommending, that we kind of base our new regulations on that. And also, as Kelsey was saying, try to get all of these different references to lighting out of the rest of the zoning regulations, because they're actually impossible to find, when they're sort of plugged in here and there. So I'm very supportive of putting this in one separate performance area.
I think just one other thing I wanted to make sure that is flagged in here. Currently, our lighting standards specifically do not apply to single and two family home properties.
Right.
The International Dark Skies model includes addressing that.
It
I
does.
think it is our preliminary read that that's a model and we can pick and choose as we intend. At this time, it was not our sense necessarily in an update that we were necessarily going to be tackling a substantially new area of single and two family homes. And because that, comes down to somebody installs a spotlight over their garage, becomes that's a very different administrative capacity. If that is something that you all are feeling like we should at least that we should be assessing, that would be important, I think, to understand in that this preliminary charge as to whether you're expecting to be exploring that subject.
Huh.
Not
I
a
would-
small thing.
Just a comment about that. I mean, you might know this, that Shelburne has some very, very strict standards. If you have a house, any kind of property on the waterfront, they are very, very specific about the amount and distance away from the waterfront that you can have any kind of lighting that shines out toward the water. And I've done some work in Shelburne. And so that is a concern for a lot of people. Somebody putting a party house or something on the lake, or making a house that already is on the lake into something that has no regulation of light. And there could be some very inappropriate things done in situations like that.
One quick question on the scope. Are we thinking, is this purely going to be influencing exterior lights or all light emitted from properties? The reason I ask is, for example, this is a pure anecdote, but is this the kind of thing that happens is what's it, 510 Farrell Street or Shelburne Road, like that new 4-story that went in next to the old Walgreens. The exterior lights, I live next to it, so I'm quite aware of it. The exterior lights, fantastic. They're like beautifully designed, super low glare, really nice. They light, they were super things, great job. The interior lights in their hallways are very light fluorescents and create way more clear than the exterior ones, to the point that we actually end up buying blackout blinds purely because of the interior lights were just shining out a whole lot. So I think it's something to consider. I mean, I think there's definitely a balancing act of, you don't want to make someone do in-depth 3D modeling for every single internal light source, but in this particular case, the main issue with nuisance light is not the exterior ones, they're well designed, it's interior. I think it was just an honest mistake. They just didn't realize, okay, but these bright stairwell lights, they're just positioned by the windows, but it's a weird situation where the interior lights are creating more issues than the exterior lights are. So just something to be aware of.
Is that the green building?
No, I'm in the green building. It's the new one that just went in. Okay, great exterior lights. They did a great job of those. It's just a slight overlook on the interior lights, and they just happen to shine right into my window.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a way to include single and two family homes at maybe like a lower level of scrutiny? But like, I'm just thinking about it, like my parents' neighbors put in this like crazy spotlight and it shines like directly straight at their house and it's really bright, and it's like,
Those driveway
it
lights and
doesn't
stuff.
need to be a light like that, like, because it's not illuminating their yard, it's like spotlighting out towards another house. And I guess it just, like, maybe it wouldn't be a level of review, but it would be more like if someone brought it to the city and said, hey, this is shining straight at my window.
That feels
Like,
reasonable. It
like,
works
it's
the case I was
almost-
talking about too. You know what I
A
mean?
bit more like the nuisance, and I don't know exactly how it would be
It's
addressed.
it sounds more similar to a nuisance thing than, because what we're, I think what Paul is trying to say is we're not, when that person put in, and I'm imagining they don't live in South Burlington, but when they put in that light, they likely needed no review from the state. Like, they got no zoning permit, they got no building permit, they just put in a different light or a different light bulb. like some of these things can have huge impacts. So having someone who puts in any light fixture and in their single family home to be then required to come to the city and get an application for it, it's like leaps and bounds above what we do now, but you know,
So that's
is there
why,
something
I guess
in a
that's
different
why I meant, like,
perspective?
maybe it's not like coming to the city for a permit for their exterior light, but maybe there's a way of like, if there is a complaint and it's like a real problem, then there's like some kind of recourse of some kind, like, you know, I guess similar to what we were talking about with.
But
Yeah.
first thing they need to do is talk to each other.
Well, obviously, yeah, but I think that's always a first step,
But if there's some sort of performance standard on the books, then if you come and complain about it, then there's something to take action against.
yeah, I guess that's what I mean. So I don't
But-
know that it would
and-
require coming for a permit to put it in, but there'd be like a standard they're supposed to be followed.
Now, I guess one thing you could consider for the standard is to cover, single and duplex new housing. Write it in and say, okay, if we're gonna build new, this is what we'd like to see. When they sell it, if the new buyers switch out all the exterior light fixtures, maybe we're not set for that, but it is a fairly easy step to include that in the standard, just to say on new construction.
I would speculate, though it's not, this is just total pure speculation, that in most cases. In most areas in South Burlington, when homes are built, there's multiples that are built by the same entity. They probably have their own vested interest in not having the spotlight across the street. I'm not saying that, you know, there are some custom build folks who do that. But if that's a thing that you would like us to look into as to what a, not necessarily getting a permit for each time that somebody is installing a light fixture in their home. But what is the realm of the, what we can,
What options? there are?
manage the worst case scenarios
Yeah.
from.
What
I think
options
we
there are
can put
for
that
people?
going, and that work.
I've come across instances of places that have something.
And I think
that
Don
have
was
to do
got
that.
that hand up there.
Don, you wanna go on?
Yeah, I think the question you're talking about now has more to do with what would be a nuisance light. And I think you can probably just create some general general regulations around that apply to any type of structure. But, you know, it doesn't have to be specific to residential, but it could apply to residential. And also particularly sensitive light zones, you know, because that's I mean, we may not have a zero, but perhaps, but places where very, very little light is desired. And, you know, I think there need to be some general regulations about that. But the other question, just, you know, there's certain kind of fixtures that are just nuisances. And, you know, you should be able to say, you know, these are not allowed under most circumstances.
Also like your own property, not your neighbours.
Well, and you know, even, I mean, you deal with clients and sometimes you want to have a regulation because people, I honestly had somebody, this was in Quechee, it wasn't here, but you know, they wanted to come and put floodlights on the back of their house so they could light up the forest behind their house. And you know, and I just said, you know, that's really not a good idea. We could put some really nice low level, low voltage lighting. You know, you could do some moonlighting out of the trees and stuff. It would be really beautiful. And he's like, I want it to be all lit up. And he's like, if you know, take that back and I won't fire you. I mean, that's how obnoxious people can be about wanting to light up the back of their properties. You know, so you know, you're doing everybody a favor by saying you're not allowed to do that. You know, and if you enforce it, then it's good. You know, so yeah, do people a favor and just don't allow certain things.
So this is great. And do we want to talk about the other performance standards?
So we put these as two separate, work plan things, so if you were comfortable in taking action on this one and approving the.
Oh.
The scope,
With
with today's discussion incorporated.
Okay,
With the changes do we do? Do you need a motion for this?
Would love one, yes.
I move that the commission approve the project charge outdoor lighting regulation updates with the changes suggested this evening.
I'll second that.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor?
All right.
Aye. And that is unanimous?
Something that was your second.
Are we allowed to do that? Or did we need to?
If it's unanimous, then
Okay,
you do not need to do a
perfect.
roll call vote.
Right, then let's move on to the other performance standards general review.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Jessica. So, this is a little bit smaller in scope in terms of just what's on the books already. The remainder of the performance standards that don't apply to lighting or as it puts it, glare, cover a handful of miscellaneous and sort of kind of a grab bag of other standards and things to be regulated that I've listed in the project charge. And the project charge itself is also a little bit smaller. For this section, it is largely to take a general review of these, which have not been updated or revisited in quite some time, and ensure that we are using the correct metrics for the ones that we want to keep to make sure that we are in fact regulating the things that we want to keep regulating, and to see if there are any overlapping regulations at the federal or state or other municipality level that we might want to align to or might make redundant the standards that we have. Just kind of do a general review and make sure that these are just kind of up to date with the times, because it's been so long since we reviewed them in a systematic way.
Is that list exhaustive?
For what is currently on the books, yes, yeah.
I'm surprised that radioactivity is monitored at a municipal level.
On
It is
paper it
in
is.
the regulation.
Yes.
Yeah,
Fascinating.
We don't walk around with Geiger counters.
yeah.
But medical offices.
True. Like I said.
Oh, it's radiologist.
They've got so many regulations.
But that's like, yeah, that's.
They do, but that's,
Sure.
Yeah.
that's an
Where
area
where
where
we
you
have it, I'm surprised that we have useful.
Yeah.
Do you, this seems maybe potentially crazy, but like, is this mainly just during like review or like ongoing, these are for ongoing?
These are for ongoing things. A review would take into account whether or not there's a likelihood these things might be an ongoing problem. Like we would kind of look at something and say, like, okay, is it likely that the proposed use of this property is going to create a violation or, potentially a violation of these performance standards. But
Examples can be like if you're applying and you're applying and you have your whole application for a restaurant or a grocery store or something that ends up having a big refrigeration unit, and the way that you've designed it and the way you've done your outside venting or whatever, it's gonna cause a huge amount of vibration and other things just because of the nature of that kind of facility. Like that sort of thing will be taken into account at the development review stage as like, hey, maybe that should be moved inside, or it should be turned or shielded or that sort of stuff.
Vibration and or noise?
So
Well, not on this, that's what I was.
noise
saying.
is specifically separate and is
Yeah.
addressed through the, but two specific examples that I can think of, and recently with the DRB, not recently, in the last decade with the DRB, it doesn't come up that often. There was a crematorium proposed in Meadowland Business Park, and the board invoked an independent technical review to review what are, what's coming out of that as a facility. And so they had a full analysis and concluded that it was under the thresholds acceptable. Another example that came up was when the senior housing at Quarry Hill was installed, they had an HVAC unit that was proposed to be right next to the property line, right next to the housing next to it, and it is basically going to run 24/7. And so from a vibration and perspective and emission of various different things, they had again, third-party independent analysis done, and there was a shield covering that wound up being installed to address that, because it's not sort of an emergency backup generator, it was running all the time, so.
Yeah.
That's the ideal way that it gets used, is that it's being captured in advance.
And
That
sometimes
said-
it doesn't. There's that one at the hospital where there was something that was installed at the hospital, it was vibrating the neighborhood, and they had to go back after the fact and like anti-vibrate it.
And fundamentally, the reason that this is in front of you is that if you look into those performance standards, there are some exceptionally dated references in there. One of them refers to a 1951 manufacturer's report. And so, you know, to Donna's point about lighting, consultants look at this and say, you want me to use the one from 75 years ago as the baseline? So it's really not necessarily trying to change policy. It is a maintenance and upkeep, and you know, what is more modern practice. I don't think these have been touched in at least a generation.
Okay, any questions or comments from anyone?
What about air pollution? So is that dust, smoke,
Particulate, yeah,
and toxins and.
Yeah.
'Cause I'm just thinking the Myers thing recently, that it's an article in the paper.
I guess I have a question about the liquid. Like, do you think that anything to do with like stormwater runoff would be like very much already covered if somebody puts a swale in and doesn't function and it overflows onto
yeah,
them?
that is
a
well
bit of
covered
a-
in
yeah,
that, as well as the subject of wastewater is very closely managed. So if there's, you know, leaks in wastewater and things like that, the wastewater ordinance takes care of that in depth. So this is in some cases, you know, in 2026, there may not be use cases for some of these things anymore, but we want to take a look.
Exactly, yeah, so just taking the opportunity to do a systematic review and find instances where that might be the case, or we need to update the standard used or something like that.
Yeah, I think the liquid and solid waste generally is sort of the very local version of like a point source of pollution. You have a mining operation that just dumps into a stream, like in a very sort of old school example. You have all of your federal regulations that are dealing with all of that, but then on the development review end, you could stop something like that and saying like, no, you can't have a brewery that just dumps your extra liquid onto the parking lot, you know, and then at some point it comes into stormwater and other runoff things, but stopping someone from doing it in the first place because of a poor design, that's when it comes from the performance standards.
Yeah, there was somewhere in this stand I'd suggested that we should add pesticide and herbicide drift, which is a common problem.
So, what I would suggest to that specifically, Michael, is, we're happy to do an initial look at that. My last understanding of that subject was that as a Dillon's Rule state, we were specifically prohibited from regulating that. Or I would say specifically not enabled to regulate that because it is agriculture and the state has reserved all things agriculture.
This is come up.
Most of the
So we can't
complaints,
do anything agricultural.
most of the complaints have been not agricultural, but domestic, that people having lawn
Right,
care.
but the subject of pesticides is the agricultural one, so.
So it can affect your phosphorus and stuff like that, because, or could it do phosphorus if it wasn't in a pesticide?
What we have looked at in the past is
It
pesticides,
has
but
been
it's-
private application of pesticides to private property.
Mhm.
And we don't have the authority to regulate that because the state is regulating it, and it's called filling the field of regulation. There's no additional room for local regulation because the state is doing all the regulating, sort of wall to wall, according to them.
filling the field, that's. in the-
But from
Sorry,
agriculture,
verb.
so
Something
just
close
from
to
an
it.
agricultural activity or spraying, drift into a domestic or a residential area like, trying to think of the places that's south of the south of UVM's fields on the
Golf
left
course.
side of, 'em. 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 it's on Swift Street. You know, the south side of Swift Street. The UVM fields go all the way down to that development. Which is called, what's it called?
Stonehenge condo?
Yeah,
Stonehenge.
Stonehenge, yeah. They're right close, bang up against each other, so that's why I raised it.
Well, it sounds like.
It can't be
it's valid,
regulated
we
by
can't-
us, then
Sounds like we can't do it.
It's occupy the field. I just Googled it. Spelling was close, but I knew it wasn't right. Occupy the field. State is occupying the field of
Very-
pesticide regulation.
Split.
Yeah.
I don't have it.
Any other thoughts or suggestions? Do we have a motion to move it along?
So moved. That is project charge on performance standard general review excluding lighting.
Oops, I'll second. Do we need discussion? Okay, all in favor? Aye, that is unanimous. Okay, we have some minutes from January 13. Any,
So I had two, Michael sent me two
One minor.
two minor edits. One was at one point, what is it? Ms. Reilly suggested removing the work unnecessary, and it should be word unnecessary, removing the word unnecessary. And then Mr. Mintag said there is a document that says people have the right to the peaceful enjoyment of their property. And Michael suggested changing document to there is a principle, possibly a legal one, that says people have the right to the peaceful enjoyment of their property. Cause that reflects what he said.
any other suggested edits? Okay, I move to accept the minutes with the edits.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, unanimous. Okay, any other business?
I just wanted to provide an opportunity if anyone had any questions about the memo that we sent out in lieu of the January 27th meeting. If not, then we can move on, but that's what I was opening now. Michael had provided one question by email about lot coverage on large lots, saying the city council's asked us to reconsider, don't we need to revisit this? No, the city council asked us to ask the planning commission to consider that on July 7th. And the planning commission considered it on August 26th. So that has been further considered after the council's request.
Okay.
So there's just clarifying a few dates there.
Tim?
Question about form-based codes in city center. First floor is supposed to be commercial customer facing, right?
In
Correct.
P5.
Right, yeah, right. I'm getting some feedback that it's difficult to lease out that space as 100% customer facing. Is it possible to think, or is it possible for some percentage of that floor space not on the street side to be turned over into office space, which is non-customer facing commercial? I don't know if this has been brought up to planning and zoning yet or not, but there is an issue where the space it's not selling, not being leased out. So
You're suggesting like not the street front, but like.
street front, glass front, customer facing, right? But behind that, if that space cannot be sold, right, that there be an alternative such as office space when there is an interest in office space or some other commercial entity. So just an idea.
So focusing on the frontage rather than.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I don't know what that percentage is, but I'm just getting some feedback, and that's not a good thing when you can't lease out an entire first floor. So anyway, just food for thought.
We're finished with that one. I wanted to talk about TDRs. It was raised by a councillor. that we missed an opportunity to create opportunities for the sale of TDRs when we went up with our increased height, that we could have tied them together. That beyond a certain height for each additional story, you need to acquire TDRs. And I think the reason that this was brought up is that Tim may bear this out, that there have been complaints from holders of TDRs who expected to sell them long ago, are beginning to complain. And it might be a legal problem for the city, because there's an implied promise in the original TDR regulation that they will be sold. People were persuaded to conserve their land in exchange for having TDRs to sell. And they aren't selling because the opportunities to sell them aren't wide enough. And so the suggestion is that we should consider one of the things we should consider is additional stories above a certain number will require a developer to buy TDRs, the way we've done with increasing building bulk, for example. We've already made those opportunities available, but we should also look for any others. There are any other opportunities to expand the potential market for TDRs.
Yeah, I think I definitely said I said alternate, because I mean, we zoned it so high, like I sort of like, I don't think people are gonna want, developers might not want to go too much higher, but yeah, as you say, alternative ways to have increase the market value of those could be interesting.
Or lower the max height and allow the
Yeah,
additional
we just
floors with
so-
TDRs.
Yeah, but avoid, how many people are gonna wanna build 16, 18, you know what I mean, versus, I'm like, what
No, they
coverage?
can't build 16 or 18, we have a limit.
So we're
whatever.
not really supposed to get into the details of this, so this was an update, and it is scheduled for the commission to begin review at a later date. So
Okay, fine.
So in
Probably
this
not
fiscal year,
quickly, yeah.
just to be clear, later
Yeah.
date, but in this fiscal year, so.
Okay.
Yeah. Knowledge.
And there is an agenda item on Monday night with city council concerning TDRs. This is executive session. Tentative.
Next Monday.
This coming.
Okay, well, thanks for bringing it up, it is a thing in our work plan, here,
Yeah.
so.
It
Tuesday.
was Tuesday, Tim? Monday's President's Day, is the meeting on Tuesday?
Yes.
Just checking.
I don't like those holidays because they.
Sorry.
Make any sense.
I'm gonna get that one right in.
All right, anything else?
No, I think we are adjourned.